Hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation about Zero Trust. My name is Jake Andrews. I'm an M365 analyst here at WPS Health Insurance in Madison, Wisconsin. And my focus today in this presentation is on forecasting the futures of Zero Trust in the United States by 2030. This presentation is for the ICT-732 futures class at UW Stout in the fall semester of 2024. And which taught us a procedure for how to predict the future. So what is Zero Trust? Zero Trust is an evolving approach to cybersecurity that was originally created in response to issues with insider threats. And the insider threats are people or devices that are on an organization's network or working from home. And when it comes to the history of cybersecurity in the last 20 years, the metaphor that's often used is like a castle with a moat. Another analogy would be like a hard outer layer and a soft inner layer, like an M&M candy or a Cadbury egg. And this has a lot of issues because once an attacker compromises an internal device or a user identity, like a password and a user account, they tend to have access to the rest of the network and the data that identity can access. And this can result in lateral movement where an attacker can use the identity that they have compromised to look for clues and vulnerable systems within the network to get administrative privileges, privilege escalation, and achieve their objectives. So as an alternative to the castle and moat paradigm, Zero Trust is based around continual step up of authentication, and it takes into account the authorization facets of where and what the user is accessing. So Zero Trust, it does not eliminate all trust, but it does prevent implicit trust, and it enhances the authentication security of explicit trust. So when we're talking about cybersecurity, there's several facets. This slide shows a picture of the main components of Zero Trust. The identity, the endpoints, the applications, the network, the infrastructure, the data. Every one of these factors has to be taken into account, like the who, what, when, where, why, and this can all contribute to the granting of explicit rationalized trust and not implicit trusting. So the process to forecast the future follows these components: framing, scanning, forecasting, and visioning. So the first step of the process was to do research on the STEEP categories. And so this is the social, technology, environment, the economic, and the political. And putting these together is a wide-ranging perspective on the different facets of the environment overall, especially the economics and the current and future initiatives, the political ramifications, the technological capabilities, and so on. So when it comes to scanning, this part of the process was researching information that can confirm or resolve issues or talk about new scenarios, creating a scenario. So I collected multiple different scanning research hits for this project. And one of the most interesting parts was the fact that the Joe Biden administration has mandated the adoption of Zero Trust for the federal government, the executive part of the federal government, which is a huge organization with a ton of complexity. And my own company is also affected by this because we're a federal contractor. So one of the parts of it as well is called era analysis, and this helps us understand the characteristics that Zero Trust has, which is different from the castle and moat traditional form of information security. So, for example, installing a single intrusion prevention system or a detection system and just kind of calling it a day. That's not the case with Zero Trust. Zero Trust is continuous evaluation, and it has monitoring by people and intelligent security systems. Another example would be like manual risk assessment of users or computers. With Zero Trust, that's all offloaded automatically, and it's pre-rationalized. And it has these risk scores in the engine for who, what, when, where, and why behavior. So in the forecasting, there's trends, plans, projections, cycles, and constants. An example of a trend would be like the human psychological vulnerability to being tricked or in phishing. A plan would be like the increases in Microsoft's funding and improvements to microsegmentation technology with the networks. A projection example would be like from a report from Deloitte, where 50% of organizations do see aligning cybersecurity with regulatory requirements, the top driver for cybersecurity strategy. A cycle that we see in this domain is the centralization and the decentralization of computer technology and information security. And an example of a constant is the CIA triad of confidentiality and integrity and the availability of computer systems. When it comes to envisioning the future of zero trust, it's useful to think of it as a cost and complexity axis. And this slide is about the different alternative futures when it comes to maturity. And one of the big components of a successful zero trust program is the ease of the multi-factor authentication. So in the future, we'll see biometrics used and passwords will be rotated automatically and managed by the IT department or by the security department. This helps prevent phishing, for example, and because people don't even know their passwords anymore. They'll just use their phone or their camera to authenticate. And when we're looking at the future of an optimal category here, it starts with knowing your data. So having a good inventory of your data and having a strong classification program corporate wide. Those are very important when it comes to understanding where sensitive data is in your network. Another consideration is the network itself. So for example, if you're accessing a system that's hosted and protected by zero trust, the risk of that network is also a factor. So this would be, for example, if you're in a coffee shop, you might not get access granted to sensitive data that's in SharePoint or an on-prem server because that network could potentially be vulnerable. Another example would be just like logging in from a library or overseas, not the USA, for example. And when it comes to applications, we're talking about continuous asset analysis of supply chains and the risk characteristics of that application, whether that's hosted or on-prem. So this would be like a software bill of materials for that application and what are the technical characteristics of that code? Does it use libraries from other open source projects, for example, that could be analyzed for vulnerabilities? And this asset analysis of the supply chain is continuous, so it's an ongoing continuous process. And the devices, so the devices have real-time risk analytics. So if your device is enrolled in Intune, for example, it would have characteristics associated with it to make sure that there isn't a keylogger or a virus on that device. And if it's not compliant or it doesn't have antivirus or anti-malware, well, people aren't going to get access to it. And then the identity, when it comes to identity and zero trust, this is more like a continuous authentication. So if you're on a trusted device and you authenticate in your morning of the day, when you're starting at work, you might authenticate once, and then when you're accessing systems, you would multi-factor authenticate as you are accessing new systems inside the network or from your device. Another factor would be, like tailored on-demand automated access. So for example, you might be accessing your data or your system, and you would have to request it, for example. You would have to put in an automated workflow around getting a manager or a senior engineer to approve that access. So the main takeaway is that every organization should seriously consider trying to reduce the implicit trust on their network and their domain using zero trust principles. However, we recognize that every organization is different with the amount of maturity that they can accomplish in trying to get to an optimum state, especially within constraints like time and budget and manpower. So the second main takeaway is that zero trust principles of strong, continuous multi-factor authentication and understanding the networks and the devices and the data can save money and reduce risk. It greatly reduces the blast radius of the inevitable breach. So it saves a ton of money in the long run by reducing the risk overall of implicit trust. So zero trust is really the future of cybersecurity in multiple ways. And with that, I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Thank you for your time today. Thank you very much.